Able. Today's Bible reading is from 2 Kings, chapter 23, verses 21 to 27. If you're using the church Bibles, it's page 331. So it's 2 Kings, chapter 23, verse 21 to 27. And the king commanded all the people, "Keep the Passover to the Lord your God, as it is written in this book of the covenant. For no such Passover had been kept since the days of the judges who judged Israel, or during the days of the kings of Israel, or the kings of Judah. But in the 18th year of King Josiah, this Passover was kept to the Lord in Jerusalem. Moreover, Josiah even put away the mediums and the necromancers and the household gods and the idols and all the abominations that were seen in the land of Judah and in Jerusalem, that he might establish the words of the law that were written in the book that Hilkiah the priest found in the house of the Lord. Before him there was no king like him, who turned to the Lord with all his heart and with all his soul and with all his might, according to all the law of Moses. Nor did anyone like him arise after him. Still, the Lord did not turn from the burning of his great wrath, by which his anger was kindled against Judah, because of all the provocations with which Manasseh had provoked him. And the Lord said, I will remove Judah also out of my sight, as I have removed Israel. And I will cast off the city that I have chosen, Jerusalem, and the house of which I said, my name shall be there." This is the word of the Lord.
Yeah, please do take. Oh. Thank you, Wilson. Hello, everyone. Nice. How are you? You okay? Massive welcome to Christchurch, especially if you're new, if you're visiting. I see a few new faces. My name is Jordan. If you've not been here before, I'm on the team here. And you're really welcome. Just to echo what Katie said, do not be a stranger. Do come and say hello after the service. We'd love to say hello and get to know you a little bit. And today I'm finishing off our preaching series on Josiah from the book of 2 Kings. I'm going to start with a fun fact. A fun fact to kick us off. Did you know that experts estimate that in any given moment, our brains are processing up to 11 million bits of information per second? In any given moment, 11 million bits of information. But here's the thing, is that our conscious minds can only handle around 40 or 50 bits of those information at a time. From 11 million to around 40 to 50 pieces of information. And the rest of that information, the other 10,900,000 and something, it's better mathematicians than me, but it's a big number, our brains are sifting through and filtering it all out, deciding which details matter the most. You know, what's essential for our safety? What do we need for survival? What do we need to flourish as humans? What do we need for understanding ourselves? What do we need for understanding the context in which we find ourselves? We can't process everything, so our minds make choices, our brains make choices about what to prioritize. And often they do this subconsciously without us even realizing this. And we call this process selective attention. What this means is that every moment we're making decisions, consciously or not, about what deserves our focus, what we'll carry forward, and what we'll let slip away. And because there's so much information, the brain is constantly looking for shortcuts, right? Constantly looking for ways to do this process more efficiently. And one of the most powerful ways that our brain does this is by using narratives. Instead of processing every individual detail, we weave the most important parts of information into a story that shapes how we see the world. As humans, we are storied creatures, right? We're storied creatures. We're meaning-making creatures. We live through experiences, we face struggles, we celebrate successes, and then we organize it all into a narrative. You know, our lives aren't just shaped by what happens to us, but by how we make sense of those events, how we interpret them, and the stories we tell ourselves about what has happened. And the thing is that once we have a story in place, once we have a narrative in place in this process, our brains tend to stick to it. We have what psychologists call confirmation bias. I'm sure you've heard of that word before, confirmation bias. And it's a built-in tendency to seek the evidence that confirms the story we already believe. It's a built-in tendency to seek out the evidence that confirms the narrative that we already have. And then that narrative, that story, then becomes our filter, shaping how we experience future moments, how we make decisions, how we live, and how we make sense of our lives, how we relate to God, and how we relate to each other. In other words, the story that you're living in is the story that you're living out. The story that you live in is the story that you live out. And so here's the question I want to ask this morning, is what story are you living in? If the story you live in is the story you live out, what story are you living in? What is the core narrative that is shaping your life, that is shaping your relationships, shaping your choices for good or bad? And is that story, is it a good story? Is it a helpful story? And most importantly, is it a story that's rooted in truth, or is it a distorted story? Maybe distorted by fear or distorted by past wounds. Maybe distorted by a story that isn't true or that is no longer serving you. Because the story we live in defines the story we live out. If we're not intentional, we can end up living out a story that's less than the one that we were made for. You know, I don't know if you've ever been to counseling or if you've ever had a course of therapy or something, but I have on a number of occasions. And as you talk to a therapist and your therapist asks you questions, generally what they're trying to do is to get a sense of those threads of meaning. They're trying to get a sense of what your core story is. What is the main narrative that you're living in? How are you filtering the world? How are you making sense of your life? Again, is it a good story? Is it a true story? In my own family, I am one of 3 boys. I have 2 brothers, and there's just 3 years separating all 3 of us. So like, pray for Mama Prance. That's like, that's my last name, by the way. Prance is my last name. She's not just like dancing around. So I'm one of 3 boys, and I am the middle child. I'm the middle of 3 sons. 3 years separating all of us. But growing up, naturally, I think they would agree. They'll let me know after this, I'm sure. But naturally, I was perhaps the more academic one, okay? I was the one who was maybe a little bit more responsible. And so when it came to schooling and education and all those things, I often needed less support. I needed less support and less attention than either of my 2 brothers. And because of that, it felt like I was kind of just left to my own devices a lot of the time, for reasons that I understand and make sense. 3 boys in 3 years, you can forgive them for leaving the one who's a little bit more responsible maybe, or seems to be okay, to his own devices a bit more, right? But it means that I do have memories throughout childhood of just kind of spending a lot of time alone with my own thoughts. A lot of self-soothing, a lot of processing by myself. And the story that's embedded me in over the years became one of independence, like a story of self-sufficiency. I'll be fine by myself. Kind of a lone wolf kind of energy. Like, I'll just sort it out by myself. I don't need anyone. I'll get it done. I'll lock in. It's fine. And it's amazing how as I've grown up, even now I have to fight to be really intentional about letting people in. If people let me down, it's really easy for the wall to go up. It's fine. I prefer it by myself anyway. I'll lock in. I'll get stuff done. It's easier on my own. And sometimes that's what's necessary, right? Sometimes that's what's necessary. There are some ways this story has helped me and served me over the years, as most of our stories, that is true. But also with that story has come real experiences of loneliness. And that has also been one of the threads in my life, is real times of isolation and loneliness where I'm not living with the sense of connection that I actually long for. You know, I am a child of my generation. We know that loneliness is such a prevalent struggle for lots of people in the modern world, especially men, actually. And part of it, as it has been for me, is rooted in a story of self-sufficiency and independence. That the moment people let you down, you shut off and you go it alone. You don't need them anyway. You know, to overcome those experiences of loneliness, I've had to unlearn that story in my adult years, to learn how to stay connected with people who have let me down, to learn how to forgive, to learn how to overcome my own sense of radical independence and self-sufficiency. And I'm sure we all have our own version of this story. The details will be different, the memories, the experiences will be different, but we all have our own story. Maybe some of us grew up in households where love felt conditional on success. And so we have this story that I have to work and strive to make myself worthy of love. If there's a story that's true in London, a lot of people end up in London because this might be a part of their story, in my experience. And so I say all that to say, just to make the point, we are storied creatures, right? We make sense of life through the stories we tell ourselves. We are by nature storytellers. We are by nature storytellers. And the question I want to ask this morning, again, is what is your core story? What is the core story that your life is telling? What story are you living by? You know, we all have a story that we're living out, and we see in the scriptures that Israel is no exception. The context for the passage we've been going over the past few weeks is that we see an Israelite nation who have lost their way. They have forgotten their story. They are no longer living as God's people. They have exchanged the reality of who God has called them to be for something far less. And a young king named Josiah rises up and calls his people back to their true identity. He calls them back into a relationship with God. Josiah rises up to awaken people once more to their calling. We've seen in recent weeks, as Josiah reminds the people of their calling, he rediscovers the scriptures. The reality that God has spoken, the reality that he has revealed himself, that he has given a source of authority and truth about the reality of who he is and how he intends for these scriptures to play a central part in our lives. And then last week, Darren talked about the rediscovery of worship and how Josiah led the people in rediscovering the worship that they were made for. You know, he threw out all the idols and all the other things that they were tempted to hold up as ultimate in their lives. And he reminded them that their lives were intended to be set apart for God alone. Rediscovery of scripture, a rediscovery of worship. And then this week we see Josiah reinstates the Passover. Okay? It's a rediscovery of the Passover. You know, this is a people who had forgotten their core story. They had forgotten their history. They had forgotten their identity. They had left behind the story of what made them God's people in the first place. They have forgotten the God who saved them, the God who set them apart, the God who chose to set his affection upon them and make them his people, the God who rescued them from slavery. And what happens when we forget the core story? Like we lose our way, just like Israel did. We wander in the wilderness. We set our hope on the wrong things that will only disappoint us. We fall in love with things that can't satisfy our eternal souls. We lose a sense of where home is. You know, sometimes we lose a sense of where we truly belong, but also sometimes we lose a sense of where we're going. We lose a sense of hope for how even our own story is going to end. Well, King Josiah in today's passage responds to this waywardness by reinstating the Passover as a restoration of their story. And we read in verse 21, it says, "The king gave this order to all the people," this is King Josiah, "celebrate the Passover to the Lord your God, as it is written in this book of the covenant. Neither in the days of the judges who led Israel, nor in the days of the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah, had any such Passover been observed. But in the 18th year of King Josiah, this Passover was celebrated to the Lord in Jerusalem." Now the Passover was supposed to be a yearly feast, right? But according to these verses, it hadn't been celebrated for around 350 years. Between 300 and 400 years was the last time they celebrated the Passover. And the Passover was a celebration where the Israelites remembered and commemorated their deliverance from Egypt, their rescue from slavery, and a reminder of the covenant that God established with them. It pointed back, the yearly feast pointed back to the first Passover, to a time where God was coming to judge the wickedness of Egypt in enslaving them. The Israelites, the reason it's called the Passover is the Israelites had to put the blood of a spotless lamb that had been sacrificed, they had to put it on their doorposts. And it was a sign of sacrifice for sin. And where there was sacrifice, the judgment of God would pass over those houses. So you can read all about this in the start of the book of Exodus. And so the Passover meal commemorates the night when God passed over their sins and freed them from slavery in Egypt. So the Passover, it was more than just a ritual. It was a meal that defined a relationship. It told them who they were. It was as much about their identity as a story of rescue. The Passover was a commemoration of their core story. And so in reinstituting the Passover, Josiah rises up to remind the people who they are, to restore their story of who they are as a people group, to remind them of the main narrative through which they were called to inhabit and to interpret the world around them. He reminds them of the main filter which they're to make sense of who they are and what they're about. The reinstitution of the Passover served as a spiritual awakening for the people, calling them back to their true story. And in spite of everything Josiah did to restore Israel to their story, after 300 or 400 years of neglect and waywardness and sin, and you can read all about the various evil that had taken place in this time period, this 300-400 years throughout the chunk in the Old Testament, But because of this, as we just read in verse 26, the land of Judah still sits under God's judgment, right? God says he's still going to hold them to account for the things that they've done, especially under the reign of a previous king, King Manasseh. Verse 26 says, "Nevertheless, the Lord did not turn away from the heat of his fierce anger, which burned against Judah because of all that Manasseh had done to arouse his anger. So the Lord said, I will remove Judah also from my presence as I removed Israel, and I will reject Jerusalem, the city I chose, and this temple about which I said, my name shall be there." Earlier in the book of Kings, we read that Manasseh shed so much blood, it says, I think it's in chapter 20, 21. It says, Manasseh shed so much innocent blood that he filled Jerusalem end to end. And so for this reason, Judah still sits under the judgment of God. And God says his name shall no longer be over them. Judah still sits under his judgment, the judgment of a just God. And this declaration, actually, in these verses, this declaration of judgment actually preceded the Babylonian exile by about 25 years. So 25 years later, the Babylonian Empire under Nebuchadnezzar invaded the kingdom of Judah, and they destroy the temple. They destroy the heart of their place of worship 25 years later. And this moment of judgment, the reason that I'm dwelling on it for a moment is because it points forward to the fact that a better covenant was needed. A better solution was needed for the destructive power of sin in people's lives. Despite all Josiah's efforts, Israel still faced judgment, and their exile revealed that something deeper was needed. A better solution to their sin and their waywardness. A better covenant was needed that would not just try to make a covering for people's sin, but a covenant that would actually deal with the power of sin in people's lives. A covenant that wouldn't just call people back temporarily, but that would transform them permanently from the inside out. The judgment points forward to a better story that was needed. The judgment points forward to a better story that was needed. And 600 years later, in a small room in Jerusalem, Jesus Christ, the ultimate storyteller, is sitting with his friends in a small upper room. And as they gather in Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover meal, the same Passover that Josiah had reinstated 600 years before, in this moment, Jesus invites them into a better story that they've been waiting for. And we read about it in Luke chapter 22. It says this: "When the hour came, and Jesus and his apostles reclined at the table, and he said to them, I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I tell you, I will not eat it again until it finds fulfillment in the kingdom of God. After taking the cup, he gave thanks and said, Take this and divide it among you. For I tell you, I will not drink again from the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes. And he took bread, gave thanks, and broke it. And he gave it to them, saying, This is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And in the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you." So Jesus, just before he goes to the cross, in his last meal before the cross, he takes this Passover meal. This meal that had been remembered and celebrated for 1,000+ years, around 1,300 years, this had been a tradition. And he adds a new chapter. You know, this story that had been told for generations and generations is about to find its fulfillment in a better story. You know, God is saying, listen, I know you've been remembering for 1,000 years what God did, how he made us his people, how he passed over our sins, how he spared us from judgment, how he rescued us from slavery. But from this day forward, Jesus is saying, when you eat this same meal, when you eat this bread, when you drink the wine of this Passover meal, do so in remembrance of me. Do so in remembrance of what is about to happen. That he gives them the lens through which he intends for them to interpret the events that are about to unfold. He tells them a new narrative. In this new story, Jesus casts himself as the Passover lamb, the spotless lamb that was without blemish, that became the sacrifice for the sins of the people. And except now, it's not just this physical rescue from slavery, but a spiritual rescue from the power of sin and death itself, a triumph over the ultimate powers of darkness. That Jesus is telling a better story. He's inviting them into a better story. He is paving the way for intimate relationship. He is making us his people. He is paying the cost of everything we've done wrong, everything that separates us from him, so that he can invite us into fullness of life, so that he can and will transform us from the inside out. Like this, friends, as followers of Jesus, this is our core story. If you're a follower of Jesus, I want you to know this is your core story. This defines you. In fact, I don't know, maybe could we bring the altar up? Is that all right, Will? Maybe someone could give Will a hand. Is that okay? Thank you. Thanks, guys. Jesus is telling a better story. Oh no, it feels quite high pressure now, doesn't it? Everyone's watching. That was a joke. Stop it, Will. Don't be that guy. Jesus is telling a better story, and he invites you into that story this morning. Like if you're new to Christ Church, or if you're visiting, or if you've joined us recently, you may have noticed we share communion every week, at the 11 and the 5, every week without fail, because we have decided it would be strange to not put this story at the heart of our gathering every week without fail. Why would we not do that? This is our core story. This is the weekly reminder of who we are, a weekly celebration of the core story of our lives, the story we're called to live in and the story we're called to live out. The lens through which God intends for us to live out and interpret our days, our weeks, and our years, the story that he wants our lives to tell. You know, I know all too well how easy it is to make this story the one that we just dip our toes into. You know, we go about our frenetic lives, and we're in London, so most of us have frenetic lives. Our careers, our busy London schedules, our busy London lives. We get wrapped up in all the different stories that the city of London is trying to tell. The stories that are shaping us. Stories of success, maybe stories of loneliness, maybe stories of anxiety and stories of stress, maybe stories of past woundedness, stories of self-actualization, stories of personal progress and triumph, stories of self-sufficiency, all these different narratives that are constantly available in the world around us. But friends, listen, historically, it's actually Sunday that is the first day of the week. Sunday is the first day of the week, not Monday. We don't live our lives for a week and then come to church on the last day of the week as a reminder for how we should have lived, making us feel guilty and shame. We come here on the first day of the week, and we remind ourselves of the story that we're going to live out in the week ahead. We come on the first day of the week and we eat this bread and we drink this wine at the start of the week, and then we get the story into our stomachs. You know, we get the story into our guts, and we become embodied in a better story. We remind ourselves what the core story of our life is, what the story that we're going to live out is as we go out of those doors and down those steps. And so this week, as we come to the table, I just want to leave us with 3 brief reflections, and then we're going to have some time to try and get this story into our guts. I'm going to leave us with 3 brief reflections. This ritual that we do every week without fail, it calls us to inhabit this story in 3 different ways, okay? Number 1, it calls us to remember with gratitude. It calls us into the present with love, and it calls us to look forward in hope. We look back with gratitude, we're present in love, and we look forward with hope. Remember with gratitude. Jesus makes it really clear in the passage we just read. When you do this, when you partake in this ritual that we're about to partake in, do it in remembrance of him. You know, the Passover lamb that is Jesus Christ reminds us that a sacrifice was needed, that sin is real and sin is powerful, that we have all done things and said things that we shouldn't have done, that we have marred the image of God in us, that we have caused each other pain, that we have increased the pain and suffering of creation, and that in a just world there are consequences for that. But it also reminds us that this is why Jesus gave his life, to pay for those consequences, to take a penalty that should have been for us and take the force of that penalty upon his own body and to pay the price so that we could know him. And for that, we come to this meal with gratitude. Gratitude that he has rescued us from the power of sin and death and brokenness, but gratitude also that he has spoken a new and a better story over our lives, and he is speaking even now, just so you know, a better story over your life. You know, as we eat this bread and as we drink this wine, we say thank you, with hearts overflowing with gratitude, knowing that any guilt or shame has been nailed to the cross. This meal calls us to look back with gratitude. And every day this coming week, may we wake up and remember what he has done for us. And may gratitude well up in our hearts as we get to live out the story that he has invited us into. We remember with gratitude. Number 2, this meal calls us to be present in love. Just like the Passover story was the story of how they became God's people. It told them who they were. It was a meal that reminded them of a covenantal love. The meal is the story of the truth that he chose us. And it's a call for us to receive his love afresh this morning, and every morning we do it. In Hebrews 12, verse 1-2, it says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God." Friends, the joy set before him was you and it was me. And this is the foundation of your worthiness of love. This is the foundation of your worthiness of love. God descends from heaven in human flesh and chooses to make you the object of his affection. There is nothing you can do to earn his love. He paid for it with his life. If you are a follower of Jesus, you are a son or a daughter of God. You are a son or a daughter of the Most High, and on this rock is your identity founded. That you belong to him, you are his child. This is the greatest story ever told, and he invites you to be a part of it. And I want you to know that when this stuff really takes shape in your body, there is a comfort, there is a security, there is a confidence that is available to you in this world as you live out this story as the core story of your life. I really feel like God is inviting us into a greater level of comfort, of security, of confidence, just a settledness about who you are because you're a child of God. These are spiritual realities as well. You can't will your way into it. You can only receive your way into it. You can only have the love of God poured into your heart until it actually starts to shape you a little bit. It starts to become the rock upon which your identity is actually founded. And you go through your days like, oh, I'm loved by God. I am loved by God. My soul is at peace. His presence is with me. There's a freedom, there's a joy. Every morning when I wake up, I get to live out this story above all else as the central story of my life. And in that story, there is freedom for you. There is more joy than you've currently yet known. There is a fullness of life. Friends, the greatest thing that this world needs from you is to inhabit the present moment with a deep assurance of the love of God. That's what the world needs. I don't care whether you're a father, you're a mother, you're a doctor, you're a teacher, I don't care how you spend your hours. What that environment needs from you is a deep assurance of the love of God. That you know that you're loved. There's a secureness, there's a confidence about who you are. There is a presence that you will carry. That's what the world needs from you. A conviction in your heart that you are his and he is yours. And he is always drawing you deeper into that relationship with him, even this morning. This meal calls us to live each day present to this reality. And so as we receive this meal this morning, may you receive his love afresh this morning. And may you offer to others the love that you receive at this table. Calls us to be present in love. And number 3, finally, it calls us to look forward in hope. As we eat this meal, we're reminded that Jesus has conquered the power of sin and death, which means that we know how the story ends. We inhabit the story knowing how it ends. Maybe some of you are like this. Every time we're watching a series or something at home, my wife, Becca, I'll see her on her phone. Maybe it's a thriller, maybe it's a suspense, and she'll be on the phone. I was like, what are you doing? I was like, you're researching the end of the film, aren't you? You're researching how this... Does anyone else do that? No, just Becca, right? Well, I'll tell her that. It's abnormal. No, but I was just like, you're researching the end of the story, aren't you? It's just like, because when she knows how the story ends, she can inhabit the present with peace. She's like, listen, it looks gritty now. There's a bit too much suspense than I can handle, but I know the ending, so I can inhabit the present with peace. Well, we look forward to a time that is in our story. We know how the story ends. And we look forward to a time that is written about in Revelation, the last book of the Bible. Revelation 21:3 says this. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. He who was seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. Friends, even though we may still suffer in the present, we know that life in a fallen world can be tough, right? Life can be brutal. But we also live knowing that we have an eternity with our Creator ahead of us, that there will be a time when he will wipe every tear away. There will be no more death. There will be no more pain. There will be no more suffering. And as we eat this bread and drink this wine, we remember, therefore, that hope is always on the horizon. Hope is always on the horizon. We serve a God who in his nature is the one who brings life out of death. He's the God who joins us in our pain, who meets us in the pit, who meets us in the place of suffering, and speaks words of life, speaks encouragement to our souls, and convinces us that hope is on the horizon. And so as we eat this bread and drink this wine, we hold on to that hope and we pull it into the present, that it might become a wellspring of life and hope within us that others can come and drink from as well. We remember with gratitude, we're present in love, and we look forward with hope. You know, this is our story. This is the story that we're called to live out. This is the story that we've been saved for. And this is the greatest story ever told. And in this story, we will find the love and the purpose and the meaning that we long for. In this story, you will find the love and the purpose and the meaning that you long for. So may we, this morning, once more make this story the core story of our lives. This is the narrative. This is the story through which God intends for us to live in the world. And I pray that in the days ahead, may our lives themselves also tell others about this story as well. May our lives tell others about this story. Like, friends, the world that we live in is desperate for a better story. The world that we live in is desperate for a better story. I pray that this morning we would become better storytellers. In Jesus' name, amen.